Welcome everyone to this month's EED webinar, Emergent Essence Dynamics. It is August 11th and our theme today is the parent-child dynamic. So in previous webinars, we've talked about building resilience, restoring autonomy, or building autonomy within ourselves. So this now is and we've talked a lot about conflict dynamics, relationship dynamics. So we're looking here at, well, how do we form all these dynamics and gains in our lives? And so it really all sources back into the parent-child dynamic. And the question is, have we all really ever grown up? What is it to be a grown-up? What is it to be an adult? What is it to be a child? And how do we carry over these things into all our relationships? So welcome everyone who is listening to the recording, and Kyle, welcome for participating live. A few other people may join, and if they don't, it's just you and me for today. So here are the basic things we're discovering in the webinar. An overview of the parent-child dynamic, and that's pretty broad, okay? And what I'm looking at here is not necessarily how to parent. All right, maybe I'll do another call in the future on that. This is not about parenting, so to speak, although it will influence the role of parenting and the function of parenting. But it's more about how a parent-child dynamic is shaping our relationship to fear, control, validation, authority, and much, much, much more. But we've talked in the past around relationship games that there are two basic games, which is control, validation. The validation is, do I exist? Am I here? Do I belong? And the control is, how do I make sure I exist? How do I make sure I'm secure? How do I make sure that I belong? And it can be based upon fear or connection to source or resilience. And so what is added in here in the parent-child dynamic is the question of authority and the development of autonomy. And so do we really retain and develop autonomy, or do we give our authority away? So, and that will determine our level of fear, control, validation, etc., in everything that we do in every game we play. Feel free, Kyle, to jump in at any time if you have a question, to stop me. There's so much to cover here. And so I'm tending to go fast, but slow me down, interrupt at any time. So what does that translate into? Well, as we're going to look at the dynamic, we're going to look at, okay, so then what are simple ways to foster resilience within ourselves and in others? That's whether you're a parent or not, all right? How to foster resilience and freedom and creativity and develop autonomy within ourselves. What does that mean? It's not going to be chaos and anarchy. We still need to maintain healthy boundaries within ourselves, with each other. We still need to maintain authority, but so we don't want to sacrifice authority. We don't want to sacrifice integrity, but we also don't want to become too rigid and controlling in that either, because that will be fear-based and that'll be reactive. So what is that sweet spot where we are resilient, we are free, we're creative, but we are still respectful. We are still operating within boundaries. We are still giving and receiving and functioning, each with our own roles and identities in unity. So maybe that sounds like utopia, but it is possible. And this is what we teach throughout in all the EED webinars and courses, which I'll explain shortly what EED really does. Along the way, we're going to look at tips for breaking free from toxic patterns of control or dependency, because those patterns can impede the healthy development of a resilient mind, emotions, body, spirit. And this can be generational, where what we learned as a child, we start to flip roles and exercise that on our children from generation to generation to generation. So the dramas don't get reconciled, right? And in other webinars on conflict, we've shown how there are lessons to learn in every drama and game, and if they're not reconciled, they just repeat. Okay, there's there's a summary there. Questions or comments there, Kyle? Let's see that you've come back on video, so just let me know, or if it sounds clear and okay, we can keep going. Okay, here we go. What is EED? What does it do? That I just want to cover very quickly. EED means emergent essence dynamics. There are 3 elements in there. What is emerging? Meaning there's a process of things constantly emerging, evolving, bubbling up. So we're working constantly in the present moment and shaping the present moment. Okay, we're not imposing, we're not controlling. All right. So, and that is so to be in the now, in the present, with presence, and being a co-creator. Right. Essence, that means connection to source. What is permanent? What is timeless within ourselves and each other? This also, and then dynamics. There is a dynamic process of change, transformation, transmutation, also dynamics in relationship between people. All of these factors put together is what contributes to creativity, change, transformation, etc. So that applies to many, many, many disciplines. What are we really doing here with emergent essence dynamics? It's a model. It's a way of capturing the fundamental process of human transformation at its very simplest and most basic. Now that can become very rich and complex, but we boil it down to simplicity in a few ways. So that this will enhance coaching, leadership, mediation, facilitation, healing, conflict management, personal growth, all of this, because it has to do with human dynamics, human transformation. So this is a base model that fits underneath everything. It's like the engine of the car. It doesn't matter what car you drive, right? So there's 3 basic things we're doing. We are first fostering resilience and autonomy in an individual, relationship, or group, and within ourselves. That is the foundation for change and transformation. If we try to change without a foundation of resilience, we're just getting reactive programming, and we're reinforcing a lot of fear-based behavior. So once we get a baseline of resilience, then we can see what's really going on in the dynamic. We want truthful action, behavior, energy, because that's going to reveal games and patterns. And then we can start to look at what are the patterns. And we can start to shift the patterns from a resilient space, which promotes growth, creativity, and everything is working like a fractal, meaning we're taking what looks complex into its simplest form and pattern, knowing that it's going to be repeating on all levels. So what's the advantage of that? When you notice patterns going on everywhere and you can identify what's the core fractal here and you can shift it, everything shifts. As above, so below. What's going on below is also going on above. So you can take any little micro behavior and that's going to affect everything. So why is that effective for coaching and leadership and mediation? You can take what's happening, look through the complexity, boil it down to what's a simple factor going on here, and speak the truth from resilience, foster autonomy in the relationship. And on a core level, something's going to shift, something's going to release, and then it will have its ripple effect. So you don't have to focus on 1,000 issues. You can focus on the core pattern and the 1,000 issues resolve themselves. How is that, Kyle? Does that sound like a bunch of gobbledygook, or how is it? What are we taking from that? It's been a while since I've done the summary of what EED is.
Yeah, no, for the most part, makes sense. I think for me, the fractal cycles, I just need a bit more context in the practical application, but on the whole, I'm there.
So here with the parent-child dynamic, what we're focused on is, okay, what's the dynamic between the parent and the child? Okay, what is the action and behavior between them, right? And then there's going to be natural patterns of growth and development. There's going to be various, what we call games that they're going to play, various patterns and games. And so what's the purpose of that? So what are the various roles the parent takes on? And what are the various games the child is going to play or learn from, right? And all the while, we're fostering resilience in the child, hopefully, so that the child can grow up to be an autonomous person. That's not always successful, because then what they end up doing is they're not fully autonomous or fully resilient. They're going to project those games onto other people. And this is what's going to create all our dramas in life, right? So part of the goal of the parenting is to prepare a fully functional human being to enter society with contribution and generosity, also resilience and autonomy within themselves. So that they're making a healthy contribution. That's ideally what's going on here. So I'll speak a little bit more on what we mean by fractal patterns as we go along. This I've shown in other webinars. This is something very basic, our levels of truth and relationship. This becomes important to understand what we mean by games and patterns. So here, and I realized I just forgot to change something on my slide. So here we are in society, we each have our own story, a singular truth, a point of view. Right? I have my truth, you have your truth. And so I formed an identity, and you have your identity. And I'm functioning within the world to reinforce my story and my identity, all right? That's basically what we're doing when we are coming from identity. One slice of the truth, all right? A singular truth. When we put two identities together, they are two singular truths, and they're going to be in opposition. Now, maybe they agree and they get along, but if they disagree, that's where we get into conflict, and we get two people bumping up against each other with two very different paradigms, right? Okay. So what we teach in EED is how do you open that bubble where they're each willing to give and receive without threat from a resilient space, where they're willing to influence and be influenced so that their opposite point of views can actually be complementary. This is what we call the dream level, where it's truth in flux, all right? The game is where we're in opposition. I'm perceiving you through my own, say, bubble, my own filters. I'm not really experiencing you. When I open my bubble, I'm letting go of my programming and perceptions, etc., and I'm actually reaching out and receiving you back into my bubble. So I'm willing to be influenced. We have other webinars on how exactly do we do this, but this is a core foundation of what we do in EED, is how to open the bubble, to open this complementary space of fluidity. This is where we can be truly co-creative and complementary to each other. So you could be a Democrat and I could be a Republican, and we both now define each other into something larger scale. You can be hot and I can be cold, and both of us together express a full range of temperature. Up here with singular truth, it's going to be either hot, either cold, okay? We can't coexist. Here we can coexist and be complementary. This is what allows diversity and unity to work together. We can drop a further level, and this is where we are essence to essence. So we're dropping identity altogether. This is a unity consciousness. We don't truly live here in the world, but we can access this. This is the level of full essence and potential that wants to get expressed and diversified on these other levels. So all four are levels of truth. All four are true, but most people don't go below that red line. They just, they cling to their identity, cling to their truth, and then they fight in their game. And they'll only be influenced by the people they trust, their friends, on condition that they play their game accordingly. So we do have moments of opening our bubble, but what we have trouble with is opening the bubble at will or with anyone, because we're still playing a game. So in a way, it's kind of a false opening. Any commentary there? This is just as a setup for what we're looking at with the parent-child dynamic. But any comments there, Kyle, on looking at these four levels?
No, it makes sense to me.
Does it open up anything, inspire or clarify anything so far, or create a question? Just taking in that.
I just, notice, particularly in the world at the moment, what you talk about, people being above the red line is, very dominant. In my own experience in the work I've done, I've played in the other two levels, so I also know what that looks like as well, and how different it is.
So what I'll say with that is, for those that are in the change profession, that could be coaching or leadership or mediation, etc., no change is going to happen above the red line. You're just going to get aggravation, and you're going to get more resistance to change. You're going to get more fear-based behaviors. This is why in EED, we establish a resilient foundation first, so that most of the fear and reactivity will dissolve. Once they hit a resilient foundation, they start to enter this complementary space, fluid space of dream, and they hit their own internal essence. And then from essence, this is like, dream is like toggle mode on your iPhone, okay? So story and game is like you've got your apps and they all function the way they are programmed, right? Dream is like toggle mode where I can start rearranging the apps on my screen. Source is actually getting into the source code programming of everything, okay? So when we're looking with change and transition and transformation, we want to drop below the red line to start accessing source so we can start reprogramming the patterns. Then they can rearrange themselves and we've got a different game and a different story once we've hit source. If we try to change story and game, it might temporarily change, but then it's going to snap back to its original programming if we never ever access dream or source. That is also why I bring this up. So what does this have to do with parenting, the parent-child relationship? Parent, of course, is already civilized in society. They're already in society functioning, etc. So they've got stories and games going on. The child comes into the world from source, pure and innocent and full of potential. And gradually as they grow up, they're going to move up the levels from source into dream. They're going to start learning games and they're going to start learning stories. And eventually, once they hit their teens and adulthood, they've solidified in various stories and games. This is my identity. This is who I am. Then from 20s onward, they can start adjusting their games and reinventing their stories, et cetera, et cetera. But in the formative years, children are operating a lot in source and dream. Now that might be frustrating for a parent because it might be in total opposition to the parent's stories and games. The children can adapt very easily in a fluid space, but children are also very influenced and programmable. So what we might be doing, and this is where we say the generational thing comes back, is my games. I don't want to project my games into the child and start programming that so they start playing the same games without the games being resolved, so to speak. That's a very simplified way of saying, what is it? What are we inheriting as children? What are we passing on as adults, all right? And then how does that carry over, not just within the family circles, but my relationship to the world, all right? The games I've learned at home, how am I still playing them outside, okay? Does that spark anything for you, Kyle, or is that pretty clear?
Oh, just a few decades of, dysfunctional family drama. Nothing major.
No, yeah, I know. Yeah, I love opening the big cans of worms. So here's a way to look at it. Our games and stories, they're all conditional. It's based on rules and conditions. I'll love you if, I'm safe with you if, and when, et cetera, right? So it's based on rules and conditions. So this is where, if you validate me, if I can control you, if I validate you, if you can control me, like all of these things, we'll get along as long as there's rules and conditions, okay? Whereas in the dream and source, it's an unconditional space. I love you unconditionally. I'm here for you unconditionally. I give to you unconditionally, okay? That sounds weird and impossible on game level. What do you mean? I give to you unconditionally. You can take advantage of me. But when I'm connected to source, essence, where it's permanent, timeless, there's nothing you can take from me because I'm full, I'm abundant, I'm essence, I'm all potential, right? So we'll look at that in a bit, like what is the difference between game and source, or game and dream? So for practitioners, whether you're a mediator, or a coach, or a leader, this is where we say the practitioner must be. So I'm saying this is in general where the parent must be in this kind of a dream space. That's a meta role. But then the parent will take on a whole bunch of other sub roles, okay? And I'll talk about that in a second. Client default, yeah, when you're working as a leader, a mediator, or a coach, that's where your client's going to be. That's where any person on the street is going to be, story or game. The exception here with parenting, the child's going to be here. So you're going to meet them actually in the dream space, and you've got to start educating them what it is to enter games and stories. That's the difference. All right. So what is a relationship dynamic? This is just very, very, very basic. So taking from that previous diagram, all right. This is the game level. Everyone's in their own bubble. So there's going to be a polarity at play. Each person is going to be taking on opposite actions and responses. So that means we're all taking on a role. Okay, so I'm the parent, you're the child. I'm the teacher, you're the student, right? I'm the master, you're the slave. That's what we mean by roles. But those two roles together are creating a polarity of complementary action. If I'm the attacker, then you must be the attackee or the defender, right? If it's an attack-defend polarity. If I'm the dominator, then you must be the dominee, the submissive, right? I'm the dominant one, you are the submissive one, right? So if I'm the teacher, then you're the learner. If I'm the expert, you're the learner, okay? That's what we mean by complementary roles in polarity. Therefore, there's going to be actions that we're doing to each other. And this is what the game is all about. It's all about status. High status, low status, all right? And so this can create competition. And the status is never static. It's always changing. So somebody's always smarter or less, or not as smart. Somebody's always older, younger. Somebody's more powerful, less powerful. And usually status is going to translate into the power dynamic. Who has the power now in the relationship? And so we play all kinds of games. The two basic games are going to be a game of control or a game of validation. Validation would be, do you love me? Do you like me? Do you recognize me? Do you agree? Do you think I'm right? Okay, that's like, tell me that I'm okay. Tell me that I'm okay. Control will be, do I feel safe with you? Am I secure with you? Right? Can I make sure that I'm going to be safe with you? And that can be either, do I trust you or do I control you? Okay. So, and both the control and validation game is going to end up being a victim persecutor dynamic. All of these games are going to end up being victim persecutor. We have so many variations and ways we can play that out. All right. So there's action given, action received. Now, what we learn in EED is how to look at any interaction between a person and start to notice what are the actions, what are the status they're taking on, what are the inner roles they're taking. So what's that polarity? That's creating a game. All of this together creates a game. I'll pause there. Any questions or comments there, Kyle? Because I know this is the first time you're ever seeing this stuff. So it's great that you're here. So that's why I keep asking as well.
No, it's pretty familiar, maybe with different language, but yeah. Yeah.
Now, I will say there are more elements to the game, but I'm showing the basics, all right? There's actually 7 elements to a relationship dynamic, and I'm only showing you 3, 4. The polarity, the status, role, action. And there is more, it's just not necessary for this presentation, okay? What is the difference here? This, at game level, it's constant reactivity. We're constantly under threat. We're constantly using masks, shields, and weapons, right? To protect this bubble, to stay within this bubble. So it's, in a way, conquer or be conquered, all right? This is the level of conflict. It's not always such a bad thing. Our enemy, what we teach in EED, is the apparent enemy is also a teacher. This challenger is challenging you to find a strength within yourself. All right. When we get into victimhood, we just want to run away. For example, I'll show you the victim dynamic here for a second. But if we drop down into the dream part, so this is another element of the relationship, is the dream level. It's when we begin to allow ourselves to affect each other and be affected, to have a give and receive. based upon a simple acceptance. Here is a level of non-acceptance. I don't accept you. I don't accept your truth. I don't accept what you say. You must accept me. You must accept my truth, my beliefs, my identity, my value. So you accept me before I accept you. That is the conditional space. Does this make sense? Down in dream, it's I accept you before you accept me. It's the opposite. That takes resilience because it is a vulnerable act to say, I accept you before you accept me. I'm taking a risk. Does that make sense? I'm taking a risk to open my bubble. I'm opening up myself to attack. So I'm throwing myself over there with acceptance and fascination to discover the truth of what's over here and take that truth back into myself. That is going to change my bubble. So I'm letting my guard down. This is a moment of vulnerability. What happens here when I open my bubble and I'm accepting you with fascination and appreciation, where I take something back in, I'm accepting you even more now with appreciation. So now we can get into a bit of enjoyment. But what the other effect is, the other person starts to naturally open their bubble. This is a phenomenon. If I open my bubble first with acceptance, fascination, and appreciation, the other person automatically relaxes and is able to open their bubble. What happens then is status disappears. There is a level of mutual acceptance and fluidity. Status disappears. Now we can start seeing essence to essence, not identity to identity. Then we can start to see how we are complementary and co-creators for something greater. And we can even swap roles. This is where empathy begins. This is where we can begin to have an understanding, a mutual understanding, and draw from each other's wisdom, as opposed to trying to conquer and convince. So this is what it is to be in dream level. This is where we build resilience in ourselves and in the relationship. The more we drop down into dream, the more we can then go back up into the game and play it bigger, better, harder to learn to uncover more truths. So this is how we work with conflict. So when working with children, children are actually more naturally here. Parents are more naturally up here in the game. What's funny in our society is parents actually need to learn how to drop, to meet the level of the child, to get to the essence of the child. At the same time, of course, we want children to enter here in the game and start learning games without losing their connection to the dream level. What's usually happening is we're just pulling children up in here and we're playing games with them. And eventually they're losing their connection to the essence and to the dream. All right. And that becomes learned behavior. And then we have to learn this all over again on how to drop. Right. And so as they get older and older and older, they get more solidified in these games. Now, if we want to do healthy parenting, what we want is to discover the natural talents, tendencies, and games of the child that they need to play. Instead of imposing our wants, needs, identities, games, and stuff onto the child and drawing them into our games, we need to actually let go of ours and get into theirs and see what is the child going to naturally develop into. That's going to create more autonomy and resilience within the child. It's going to create more autonomy and resilience within the parent. This is one point, all right? I'm not saying that you have no boundaries, but what I'm saying is the part of the challenge in parenting, in the parent-child dynamic, is usually the child is naturally oriented towards here, parent is naturally oriented towards here. Why? Because that's what we know when we're civilized and older. Children know source. They're more connected to source than anything else. And quickly they can lose their connection to it and then they enter the game world. Any comments or questions there, Kyle, from what I'm saying here? Or disagreements?
You want to start a fight, do you?
I can, or a debate.
What's a polarity?
Two opposites at play, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah, polarity. So hot, cold, that's a polarity, okay? On game level, hot and cold is going to be competing for who's dominant. On dream level, hot and cold work together to create a range of temperature. It's the temperature that holds hot and cold together, all right? Okay. As a simple way. And there's other webinars where I go much more into polarity and how that contributes to the game. All right. So here's another way to look at it. We all come from an essence or source, all right? That's our level of infinite awareness or all potential. But in every moment, we're going to have two selves that emerge. Why? Because our world is not based on essence. All right? Our world is an expression of essence. So we need to be in vehicles that express essence. That means we're going to have two kinds of selves, a pathetic self or a resilient self. And both of these selves want to take action, all right? They want to take action in the world, but for two different reasons. Why? Because the pathetic self, meaning addicted to drama, addicted to like pathology, right? Strategies, pathos, pathology, and then just self-indulgence, all right? Why? Because they're taking action because they're disconnected from source. They feel the separation. They feel the separation from essence. This is the separation of identity, the individualism, and they feel an isolation. And what they want is a reconnection to source, all right? So the resilient self, though, has maintained the connection to essence. It is still an individual, it's a self, but it still maintains a fluid connection to its essence, all right? So think of this as a video game. Here's the video game player sitting at the computer. Here's the avatar, the character in the video game. This character thinks, the video game character thinks it's its own person. It doesn't realize there's a controller behind it. But what it wants is a sense of who can give me a foundation? Am I here just all by myself? Because I really feel an emptiness, like I'm going to die and dissolve into nothing. As soon as this game ends, I'm dead, right? Whereas here, oh no, I'm working with the controller. Therefore, I can be in fluid relationship. I am not the game. The pathetic self is like, I am the game. And if the game doesn't exist, I don't exist. Therefore, maybe I didn't explain that well, but the pathetic self is always asking, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Because it's seeking a connection to an external source. It wants to return to source because it feels the nag of this separation, this gap. If it falls through that gap, it is annihilated. It no longer exists. So it's looking for some source of power to give it a sense of validation and control. So it's looking to plug in. All right. It's driven by fear and reactivity, fear of the gap. All right. The resilient self is the opposite. It's taking action because, it says first, I'm connected to source, therefore I'm okay. And that's it. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm okay. Now I have the freedom to just create, and it's going to create in order to express creative ideas, express essence. It's expressing all the very different facets of essence. The pathetic self is simply trying to survive to close that gap. So this is what drives us. This is the self of fear and reactivity. This is the self of being able to thrive and create from resilience and autonomy. So when we go back here, we're playing the game from the pathetic self, the disconnected self. We are in the dream level with the resilient self, all right? That's the difference. So children are highly resilient, but they're so resilient, they're also programmable. They don't make differentiation, all right? The advantage of the pathetic self is it's constantly questioning. It's always finding the cracks in the wall. It's finding what can possibly go wrong, okay? This is left brain behavior. It's analyzing, criticizing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, it's the guardian, basically, of the resilient self. The resilient self is so resilient, it's also all accepting. So it's highly programmable, all right? It can take action off everything and anything. It sees a crack in the wall and says, great, there's 1,000 things I can do, as well as just leave the crack as it is, and I'm still resilient, okay? So We want the two to work together. We need game and we need dream together. The game establishes the lessons in the arena to play out the lessons. The resilient self gives us the strength and the wisdom and the awareness to learn and master the lesson, all right? So the two work together. What's happening in our society is the resilient self is getting very little attention, and the pathetic self is getting tons of attention. The gap is getting aggravated, where we get more and more freaked out and fearful. Therefore, we want to plug in more into something external, and then people present themselves as the external source to program into, to plug into. And this is what unhealthy parenting can do as well. It can instill the fear in the child to find the source of authority, validation, and control in the parent. That can work sometimes, but then it can backfire, because then once the child starts to hit a certain age, they may start to question the authority, and they may start to find a different source. And this is when they get into the rebel victim dynamic, okay, which I'll get into next. Any questions here so far, what I'm presenting here or saying?
I can recognize both in myself, pathetic and resilient. And also, you know, in some of the patterns showing up in society, particularly with social media, need for validation, etc.
Yeah. And a lot of society is taking advantage of the pathetic self and aggravating it, right? Very little is going on in the news media cycle about building resilience and being a resilient person. They're more screaming at the pathetic self to scream back, right? Or to cower in the corner, or to say, you know, help me. So, yeah. We need a re-education on how to build resilience within ourselves and how to create a healthy balance between the two. There are a lot of personal growth and leadership programs that actually try to eliminate the pathetic self. They'll say, you know, don't feed your gremlin, the inner critic, the monkey chatter, like get rid of it, right? Or don't feed your saboteur, all that, just send it away. We're not saying that in EED. We're saying recognize it, but then shift your focus into what is resilient within you. And there's various ways that we plug, there's easy and various ways to plug back into source. And one of it is, no matter what is happening around me, how am I still okay? Because it's shifting from am I okay to I'm okay. And what's the first feeling you get? Like, I'm okay. Well, no, I'm not. Okay, that's the freak out of the pathetic self. Okay, so freak out, you're freaking. Are you dead yet? No. Oh, so then how are you still alive? Oh, well, I don't like what's going on, right? That's the pathetic self, but I'm still here. That's the resilient self. How am I still here is going to plug you back into source. What am I connected to that enables me to still be here and still be okay, whether I like it or not? That is getting back into the resilient self. All right. So the really simple questions that we actually tend to overlook and ignore, because part of the obsession of the pathetic self is I got to solve this, I got to solve this, I got to solve this. But at the same time, I have no connection to creativity. So it's a futile cycle. It never ends. All right. Does that spark anything? Or is that pretty clear?
Pretty clear.
Okay, so as I mentioned, children are coming from source, gradually moving into the games of the world. So there's a baby from 0 to 2. Really here, we're just focusing on developing the safety, the security, and the body of the child, just getting them into being nurtured and healthy. That's really mostly what we're concerned with, all right? When they're a toddler, 2 to 5, this is when they start toilet training. This is when they're gonna, this has to do with our circuits of consciousness. This is circuit 1 as a baby, just root vitality. Then as a toddler, they start to move and explore. So they're starting to be mobile, meaning this is why you want to childproof all the, you know, your whole kitchen and living room and cupboards and all that. You don't want, because they're going to explore everything. They're going to get into everything. You don't want them to hurt themselves. So you want to look after their safety, but they're being mobile, they're moving. So here is where they're going to move. They're toilet training themselves. They're getting their first taste of independence. They're going to want to push boundaries. This is all about exploring and establishing boundaries and territory, all right? So as a baby, you have one focus as a parent. As a toddler, you have a different focus. Here is just health, vitality, security. Is my baby healthy, right? And growing and fed and secure and loved and nurtured and safe, okay? Toddler, they're going to start fighting back with you because they're going to get political with you. They want some independence, but they have no idea yet how to take care of themselves. So you've got to protect them. You've got to give them some parameters and boundaries to move around within and within a safe space. All right. So you got to establish safety with them. They're going to get very emotional. That's why we call it the terrible twos, because the emotions get activated here. Then when they start speaking, I know they can start speaking around 2, 3, 4, but let's say from 5 to 7 is when they start really speaking, languaging things and making sense of their world. All right, this is circuit 3, mental. They start opening up and developing their mental circuits as a young child. And I'm saying young child up to 7 because up to 7, they're still forming. They start to get more crystallized as of 7 onwards into a distinct personality. You can see a distinct personality already developing before 7, but there's something that starts to solidify and plug in by 7 years old, all right? This is where they're starting to language and make sense. Then from 7 to 12, they start becoming their own being, own independent person, okay? They're starting to take care of themselves. They're moving around. They're making sense of things. They're languaging, they're questioning, okay? And they're getting ready to enter the world as a functioning human being. This is where they're going to hit what's called a rite of passage. This is fast disappearing in our society, the rite of passage. In Jewish culture, this would be the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, all right? In Catholicism, this would be the confirmation, all right? Around when the child is about 12, 13 years old. You see this in tribal culture, okay, where they take the child through a test. This is where they have to earn their adulthood. It's like they're walking through a door, saying goodbye to the innocence of childhood, and they enter the beginnings of adulthood. This is where they begin to find role and function. This is also when puberty begins, which means they can be sexually active or reproductive. That's putting them into adulthood, all right? They're able to have a child of their own. If they're able to have a child of their own, this is circuit 4, the socio-sexual circuit. They're able to start their own family. That means they need to provide. That means they need a role and a function. This is where they need to start contributing to the society. This is where they enter their teenage years. So the role of the parent will change here as we guide them. We take them through the rite of passage and guide them and mentor them into adulthood. From the early teen, this is where they're going to be real rebel victim, and they're going to explore so many identities. And then late teen, they start to come into their own. They start to function more and more like an adult. They probably could. They're in their last phases of innocence, or maybe not. And then from 21, as the young adult, this is where they start to leave the nest. They're on their own, they fly. And then 21 plus, they're an adult. They could be starting their own family. But we still are a parent to them, right? But the whole thing changes. And then eventually, as they get older and older, they might start taking care of the parent, right? So then there's a role reversal. But these are basic phases that I divided into, so that the role of the parent changes, because with each phase, the child takes on more and more authority over themselves. They learn how to work with outside authority. They learn to have control within. They learn how to work with outside control. They cultivate validation within, and they learn how to work with the validation that is sent to them. So also they develop resilience. So all the way through, they develop resilience, autonomy, and creativity in all of these phases. In all of these phases, the parent is gradually letting go and increasing the space of the playground, let's say, that the child can play within. When they're very young, you want really strict parameters and boundaries. And then as they get older, as they test themselves, fail, fumble, succeed, we gradually keep expanding their boundaries until they're their own person and they're fully autonomous. Right. Questions, comments there, just on the phases?
Just that, you know, from my observation, very few parents understand how to adapt to best support their children at each stage.
Yep.
It's just kind of a bit of a lottery.
That's why I'm saying I'm saying this is fast disappearing. I'm also seeing the way media is going. They're trying to erase this rite of passage. They're trying to put young adult concepts into even the young child or the toddler. So they're trying to fast track them over the bridge. And then when they get older, they're moving them backwards into being just, you know, young children, because a young child or an older child does not, they're still being taken care of by the adult, meaning the adult still feeds them. They go out and play and then they sit at the dinner table and dinner's going to be there. Do you understand? As a young child. But when they hit early, later teens, maybe they want to go out and play, but maybe they're also going to have to make the dinner now and put the dinner on the table. Do you understand? They got to start learning responsibilities. So what's happening, I'm seeing, is without a rite of passage, we're bringing that younger child mind into the adult where they're not taking responsibility. They want all the reward without the work. So this is developing entitlement, for example. This is what's feeding the identity politics, the victimhood. I demand you to see me and recognize me for who I am and what I want to say. But then when you say, all right, fine, now are you willing to stand for it, fight for it, and create that for yourself? Or are you expecting me to create the platform and do all the hard work for you so you can just voice yourself? You need to create everything for yourself. Initiative, take responsibility. If you fail, find the way to get up again and succeed, and don't expect me to give you handouts to be able to do that. To be an adult is to be autonomous, which means to be self-reliant. And without a rite of passage, the rite of passage is a way to shed the innocence and take on the self-reliance part of it. Then part of what it is to be a healthy adult is to never actually lose connection with that childhood essence, to reconnect to that, to be able to still preserve innocence within ourselves, but to know I am no longer innocent because I'm functioning, but I haven't completely disconnected from it. I'll stop there just to get your commentary on what I'm saying, so, which started from, we're losing the rite of passage, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I can see that as well.
So if we pay attention to tribal societies, they keep that rite of passage in place. All right. In a modern society, it's disappearing. We need to find ways to put this back in. There are opportunities and there are ways. All right. Also, when this rite of passage disappears, the child is never completely transitioning into an adult. And then we're trying to put some aspects of adulthood to bleed into the child. Okay. Like one example that's trending right now is, you know, to have a young child start to question their gender before they've hit puberty. All right. You're asking them an adult question that doesn't belong at this phase. The child just needs to play and explore. They can play dress up. They can wear dresses and cowboy boots and cowboy hats all at the same time. To them, they're not attaching it to an identity yet. What they're doing is they're playing games and roles. Okay, they're taking on various roles. After rite of passage, This is where they start to really start thinking about identity, because they're entering society with a role and a function. Now I'm going to have some kind of an identity and preferences. But I've explored enough as a child. I've created a menu, a diverse menu of things to choose from to start gathering an identity together. And here they can start applying various identities. This is where, if you do work with the Enneagram, if there's a main type in the Enneagram, it doesn't really settle until they're about an adult or a young adult. It's once we hit about 20, 21, late teens, right? Then we might move into other Enneagram types, as we move through our 40s, 60s, like every decade, every 2 decades, we might start switching types, possibly, but there is a default type. But we don't know what that is. There might be tendencies towards all 9 of those Enneagram types here. And then when they're in early teen and later teen, they might start narrowing it down into a few different types, but then they'll eventually settle. All right. But we've got to let things emerge. All right. That's just further commentary. Well, I'm hitting the top of the hour here. So look, these are things to think about with the parent-child dynamic. A, what's the main thing? Maintain a child's connection to the source as they get older. They are already at source as a child. What happens as we enter society, that link to source gets severed. Then we start looking for external sources. So what we want to do is have them have a healthy relationship to source internally, and then be able to look to external sources without losing their connection to an internal source. All right. From source, they can then have a healthier relationship to validation. Am I here? Do I exist? And control. How do I make sure I'm here? How do I make sure I exist? Because otherwise, if they lose the connection to source, they're going to look for external validation and external control. What that's going to do is have them fall into patterns of fear, and they're going to look towards external authority. If they maintain an internal connection to source, they can build a resilience within themselves. Of course, they're going to feel fears, but they can still counterbalance that with some inner resilience and creativity. Then when faced with authority and external threats, because they have resilience and an internal connection to source, they can also have autonomy where they can discipline themselves, have some control and discipline within in order to manage themselves, because they have a healthy, resilient sense of self-worth. All right. So all of these work together. There are external factors in the world. There's an external world and an internal world. Both connect to source out there in general, unified with society, but also the source within. I am at one with myself. All right. So I'm saying those are some basic parameters that we're playing with in the parent-child dynamic. If the parent is coming from fear themselves and authority, they're going to cut off this whole one side of resilience, autonomy, and an internal connection to source. They're going to cut that out. And they're going to just transfer their own fears and authority issues and control and validation issues onto the child, and the child just ends up repeating it with a role flip. So on one end, they're getting victimized by the parent, and then as they get older, they'll start victimizing somebody else. We start as victims, move into persecutor, and then move back into victim, so to speak. What happens when we leave home? And if we've been under that kind of a parent-child dynamic as a child, I've been cut off from my internal source, resilience and autonomy, and I start having a relationship of dependency on authority, external authority, control, and validation, driven by fear. I'm going to replace the parent with a government, a religion, an expert, a guru, a savior, a rescuer. Any of these things, I'm going to transplant the parent and make that my parent. Why? Because I lack the rite of passage, right? Because what's the point of the rite of passage? It's to crystallize consciously within the child their own internal connection to source their own ability to cultivate their resilience and their ability to cultivate their autonomy. Without that rite of passage, they are now dependent on someone else to provide safety, security, and authority. How is that sounding, Kyle? I got in a little bit of a soapbox.
Exploded just yet.
So what?
I said my brain hasn't exploded just yet.
Any questions or comments on that, or just to help make sense of it? I'm going to improve this graphic just so that it looks a little bit more clearer. But this was just a rough draft of the graphic. But and these are some of the main dynamics we're dealing with all throughout our lives. And this is what EED is not solving, but it's moving us from external to internal, reestablishing our internal connection to source, to develop resilience and autonomy so we can have a more healthy relationship to fear and authority, external control, external validation. So we are providing our own sense of control and validation, all right? We're always going to feel fear. We're always going to face authority. But how are we in relationship to that? Is it from emptiness or from fullness, resilience? Okay. There's one more thing I'll show you, and then I think we can wrap it up. But so anyway, it's just back to you. Any questions, comments, or even just what feels inspired or reinforced within you?
Well, I think, reinforcing, how in many ways broken our society is in terms of how, to the left of that dynamic, it is skewed, how much work there is to be done to help people, heal, or whatever terminology you want to use.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that we don't want to cut the external parts out. We don't want to eliminate fear, authority, external stuff, right? I'm not favoring the internal side with resilience and autonomy. What I'm saying is, ideally, we're going to have a healthy balance of all of them. They all counterbalance each other, all right? And we have fluidity of movement. To move from fear to resilience and back and forth, to move from authority to autonomy, to move from external sources to the internal source, to move from source and express validation, control, like all within healthy balance. Okay, it's all counterbalanced, and we have a fluidity of movement. Just like with the pyramid, I can move from story to game to dream to source, back to dream to game to story. Like I have a fluidity of movement. This is what we're looking for. I can move freely between pathetic self, resilient self. It's all about freedom of movement. It's not about elimination. Because otherwise we start acting like these teenagers. This is the rebel victim dynamic. And this is what's getting pushed right now with the identity politics. So the pathetic self is always moving from emptiness into fullness. It's seeking that external source. It's moving from danger to safety. This red circle, you could call it anything. You could call it work. You could call it loneliness. You could call it abandonment. You could, whatever you want to call it. You could even call it connectedness. Like I can't stand to be overwhelmed and connected with people making their demands on me, right? So our pathetic self is constantly fleeing danger in search of safety and fulfillment. But sometimes life will start to push them back towards the danger. So they cling to the safety and the fulfillment. And if pressured, they're going to fight that emptiness and fight that danger, right? This is the polarity work, the polarity swings, all right? These are our 4 reactive behaviors, okay? You can call those the reptilian behaviors. The freeze response is when we try to stop the movement and we're pretending like, oh no, there's no danger, there's no safety. I'm just like perfectly balanced somewhere in between, not moving, not making a choice. Okay, that's the freeze, right? That's where we put up shields and try to disengage from the flow of life, right? There's other webinars where we talk about that shield behavior. What I'm saying is the teenager really exhibits this rebel victim, because the victim is going to flee danger and cling to safety. The rebel is going to fight the danger and escape to something else, greener pastures, to safety. So the rebels like they're going to be defiant and say, you can't tell me what to do. And then if they don't want to fight anymore, they'll say, well, fuck you, I got my own thing going on, right? And they escape into their own, I'm going to make up my own company. I'm going to, fuck you, Dad, I'm going to build my own home. And then they come crawling back and say, yeah, but I don't have a job or money, so can you take me back, right? So, that's the rebel. They're very active. They're fighting and escaping and fighting and escaping. The victim, fleeing could be, yeah, they run, but it's more of they'll avoid, they'll deny, they'll pretend, they'll disappear. That's part of what fleeing looks like, okay? They're withstanding the danger, but they're also denying and disappearing, all right, from the danger. Or they become really defiant and clingy and dependent or stubborn, right? That's the active victim, okay? This is what we see in the identity politics. This, let's call it you can call it the social justice warrior. I know a lot of people are going to get mad at me for saying that, but they're either acting like the rebel or the victim. The point is, they're not connected to source. They're not acting from resilience. They're being reactive. So how do you neutralize this dynamic? How do you bring more autonomy into the teenager, into the rebel victim? They need to cultivate resilience in themselves to be able to face the danger, to be able to reconcile themselves with the danger, to reconcile themselves with the emptiness. And that is, again, what the Rite of Passage is about. It's almost like a dark night of the soul. Do not flee or fight the fear, what we fear, the emptiness, but it is to face it and allow that to become a teacher. Allow this dangerous enemy, which threatens annihilation, to teach us something. It's going to awaken a strength. This has to do with the hero's journey. It's going to awaken a strength. So part of the Rite of Passage is dissolve what was and then resurrect and re-emerge. Stronger, more victorious. And that's how we neutralize this whole rebel victim dynamic. Any comments or questions on it? And this is part of what the parenting is about with the teenage years. You want to let them go back and forth on this parenting, but you want to keep guiding them to come back to their essence and their resilience and eventually make peace with whatever they're fleeing or fighting. It's way too easy to hide out here in the false fulfillment land. Because if they're here and they don't reconcile themselves with the emptiness, they will create dependency or blame. You took away my safety. You took away my fulfillment. Or I need you to keep me safe and keep me fulfilled. Because they're avoiding this whole side of the equation. Any comments or questions there on what I'm putting forth, or disagreements?
Nope.
Okay, great. So we're at time here. So how do we maintain resilience? This is in other webinars. You can ask that question. How am I still okay? What's there? Just keep feeding how am I still okay? Whatever that quality is, whatever the sensation of that is, where is that located in my body? We teach ways on how to purify that, distill it so you can eventually land in some kind of an unconditional quality like love, peace, unity, limitlessness. Those are the four main essential qualities that emerge when we recontact source or essence. Then you start circulating that through your own body, right? Down to the feet, from center to feet to center to head, back to center. This is a way of sort of neutralizing everything and getting in touch with source and resilience. This can be done every day. This can be done for just a few seconds or a few minutes. This is a way for us to move from pathetic self to resilient self and plug back in. How am I still okay? What is it that I'm connected to? What enables me to feel the connection? What is the energy I'm connected to? What is the energy I am? What am I enjoying in this? And how does that feed my well-being? So what is the energy? What am I enjoying in it? How does that feed my well-being? 3 key questions that are going to relax us into an essential energy that we can circulate. Circulate that from center to feet, to center, to head, to center. Then you can expand it into the earth. Let all that energy drain down into the earth, and in the earth, it'll naturally come back. Let it go up into the sky, let it come back. That plugs us in to the world in a resilient way. We start to unify ourselves with the world around us. We have a resilient relationship with ourselves and our world. So what you're really doing is you're letting go of the fear, the negativity, the toxicity. You're taking in vitality. All right, that energy is giving you something that you can also give. It is so abundant, you can give it away. And then you can receive back the inspirations from the universe. Take what you will. So this is what we call the vertical loop. We teach this in the very first module of Emergent Essence Dynamics, and I do have other webinars. A good one is Core Vitality. What is it? And Resilient Well-Being. Core Vitality, Resilient Well-Being. I think it is webinar number 9 from 2020, where we break this down in detail. This is the basic thing we do to build resilience. From there, then you can go back into what am I facing? What am I confronting? What's the danger? Now you have a resilient base, and you will be in a more complementary relationship to what you're struggling with or what you're fearing. Questions there, Kyle? This is what the parent has to do to themselves to deal with their child, especially when the child is giving them a hard time. And then to teach our children how to access this when the child starts to get disconnected or scared. And this is what we do in our relationships. This is what creates healthy relationship with ourselves, with others, and the world around us. This is a very basic thing to do. Any comment, question there, Kyle?
No, I'm pretty familiar with that. I use a similar model myself.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. So just in a summary, and I'd love to know what you're taking away. The parent-child dynamic, and there's more I can do on this, and I maybe will get more webinars. And people can email me and ask, what about this? What about that? I'd love to hear comments and questions. The parent-child dynamic is what shapes our relationship to our own inner source, whether we're connected to it or not, and how that inner source is going to engage with the world around us. That's going to affect our relationship to fear, control, validation, and our ability to cultivate resilience, autonomy within ourselves, and whether we can flow with creativity or not. I mean, we're going to find our own level of creativity. It's more questionable whether we have the ability to willfully connect with resilience and autonomy, or do we just resort to fear, control, and validation? Right? This is, what I'll say is this was formative for us, but it doesn't mean that we can't come back to resilience and autonomy. So this is where, I don't want to say the Freudian model, I'm forever damaged because of what my mother did or my father did. No. We are not forever damaged. We've just learned games. What we need to do is recognize the games we're playing and reconcile them within ourselves so we return to our connection to source. For a parent, the challenge is to remain in the meta role of a facilitator, meaning in that dream space. You're really just there to serve the child in their various phases. And along the way, you're going to embody various roles. You're going to be a savior, a rescuer, a discipliner, a king, a god, a teacher, a guru. You're going to be all sorts of roles to help shape the child so that the child can experience many various games, a multitude of games to find out who they are. And the goal of the parent is to serve the child, to prepare a fully functioning and resilient human being to enter society. That's it. They're not our toy. The child is not our friend. Okay, they're not our lover. We are there to serve the child. And this is where parenting can feel thankless, because we're not doing it expecting something in return. The parent is making a commitment to raise somebody and groom them so that they can enter society to make a generous contribution, so that the child goes through their rite of passage to have a role and a function and make a contribution to society at large, to humanity at large. So we can heal our own dynamics from our past by simply, I talked about this before, by reconnecting with source, reconciling our games within. This is the whole point of learning EED, is to learn the games and how to reconcile them. And then, yes, you can apply it to coaching, leadership, mediation, all of that, so you can have other people learn their games and reconcile them, but you can also do that personal work for yourself, so that we are healing our relationship to fear, our relationship to control, to validation and authority, so it becomes healthy, so that we're reincorporating resilience and autonomy, so that we can live in unity with diversity and creativity. So it is important that we reclaim our rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. This is the transmutation that we go through. This is an alchemical change. In fact, we could say 2020 has been a rite of passage, because it's like a dark night of the soul. We will go through many rites of passage, not just when we hit like 12, from child to teen or child to adult. We're going through rite of passage every decade, every day even. It depends. What we, in other webinars, we've called it the death's door, but this is part of our hero's journey. So be aware of opportunities for a rite of passage where we allow something to dissolve and we can allow new strengths to awaken, and we can integrate them and incorporate them. So it is important to remain connected to our own essence and our own innocence, while being creative and responsive with everything around us. That innocence means we preserve the innocence of the child, that to have awe, fascination, curiosity, acceptance, but also to be able to have discernment, judgment, initiative, and accountability and responsibility as an autonomous adult without relying on dependence on something else. We are self-reliant, we are co-creative. That is the point. There's more I can say, but we're taking away here. Kyle, what's your own summary, or either what is reaffirmed, reinforced, or what feels insightful or inspiring?
Well, I mean, I've been a big believer for a long time that we've lost too many rituals in society, rite of passage being one of them. So, very much reaffirm that. And, so easy to see how much the breakdown of families and the way that we parent in so-called the developed world is, pretty broken. And yeah, a lot of work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done, and yes, it's broken, but it's not irreparable, is what I'm going to say. But there is a re-education within ourselves, and what's not going to help, which I'll say in summary, is if we point our finger and say, "You need to grow up, you need to change," because what we're doing is we're just perpetuating the game. Remember, I said dream is where it starts from within. I accept you unconditionally. So that means I have the discipline within myself to endow myself as being resilient and autonomous. Therefore, I'm able to open. How do I do that? Connecting to my essence, because essence is permanent and timeless. That allows me to open. So I have to do my own inner work first. It goes right back to what Gandhi said: be the change you want to see in the world. It starts from you, it starts from within. So we have to stop pointing the fingers. But this is what we're encouraged to do. This is why I don't like and I don't believe in identity politics, because it's based on pointing the finger. You need to recognize me before I recognize you. You need to see and hear me before I will see and hear you. No. Work on connecting to your own essence so that you can validate yourself. When you are self-validated, it doesn't matter if anyone sees or hears you. You know you exist because you are connected to your essence. From there, you can start creating a cooperative and complementary relationship with everyone around you, and it is not dependent on whether you like them or they like you. You see the essence of humanity within other people. This is where I'd like to see us moving. That's where we can start repairing these dynamics. So it comes from within, and it's just key to connect to our own essence. We will have new courses starting in the fall for EED, where you can learn all this stuff practically. In the webinars, I'm giving concepts. It's more conceptual with some tips and tricks, right? But to really learn the discipline of this stuff, because it's not easy work, but it is easy and it's not. That's why we have the courses, right? The next webinar is going to be in September 8th. It's called Transmuting Emotions. This is where we can not indulge on our emotions, but refine them, so that we can actually take refined action and use emotions as fuel, as opposed to using our emotions to fight, destroy, trigger, and traumatize, right? We can purify our emotions so that they are productive and creative. And if there are any questions, just email me at info@essence-dynamics.com. We're on YouTube, where you can see previous webinars at EED Dynamics. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, or our website can describe EED in more detail, essence-dynamics.com. So any last words, Kyle, on what you take away? What do you want to say?
No, thank you and good night. My brain is reaching its limit for today. It's 8:30 here.
Oh, yeah, we really did. So yeah, thanks for staying this extra time, and thank you all for listening. I know I always program too much, and I always, well, I want to do that. I do want to like oversaturate you, so you have lots to walk away with, lots to chew on. So just reflect and enjoy, and always feel free to send me a question or a comment, or leave comments on the YouTube comment section. And in the meantime, just keep radiant and resilient, and most of all, enjoy.